Children of Dune was released originally in 1976, 7 years after Dune Messiah from 1969, and 11 years after Dune, released in 1965. In universe, this book starts in the year 10,219 AG, and although it is not mentioned what year it ends, I believe it must either end in 10,220 AG or 10,221 AG. Something I didn't touch upon was Dune's reception by readers and critics. According to sources I read on the internet, the first 3 Dune books were mostly well received, especially the first one, with some stating that it was the best sci-fi story ever written. But not everyone liked Frank's work, as we have, for example, J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings, someone who, although didn't review Dune, admitted that he disliked the work. I think it is quite understandable. Tolkien had a more romantic view of destiny and the concept of the hero. He was also religious, while Frank Herbert saw heroes as dangers to society and destiny and religion as fabricated, just artificial myths. But still, I think both authors are the best in their respective genres. Fantasy for Tolkien and science fiction for Herbert. I personally think this is the best book out of the first trilogy. As we know, Frank wrote the first trilogy, then God Emperor of Dune, a bridge to a second trilogy, of which was never finished because, well, he died before he could finish it. I also find probable that George R.R. Martin will die before he finishes A Song of Ice and Fire, similar to how Kentaro Miura died before finishing Berserk. The boat journey that never ended, am I right? Well, let's leave all that aside and move on. As for in this video, I will also structure it a bit differently. Before, I already said how I left the first book a lot more summarized on that analysis. Depending on its reception, I might even make a new version of it. While for the second book, I went in depth on every single chapter, chronologically. As for this video, I will try to group together certain events as to make my narrative of the story much easier for new people to understand. So with all that out of the way, let's just get into Children of Dune. The first chapter is one of my favorites from this book. Stilgar is checking in the twins in their respective bedrooms. He walks around in the dead of night using an Ixion projection machine to identify anything suspicious in their rooms. Leto II and Ghanima, the twins, are now 9 years old. They turned out just like Alia, preborn with memories of their ancestors. Stilgar, after confirming both rooms are secure, starts pondering about killing the twins himself. By doing that, he would most certainly get rid of Muad'Dib and the Atreides' reign over the Fremen and the Imperium forever. Stilgar recalls, as he does many times throughout the story, about how the old customs of the Fremen are being abandoned. The Fremen themselves never called Dune as Arrakis, for it was an invention by the Imperium. And now the planet is turning green, rain is falling out on the desert, and some Fremen have even drowned because of floodings. Stilgar questions himself why Jessica is just now coming back to Arrakis after all these years. The government has fully become a theocracy. Muad'Dib's religion, now controlled by Alia and her clergy, reigns over the Imperium. Stilgar is old, but even he has changed. He still ponders about getting rid of them. Finally, the morning arrives. Servants come in to attend the twins. In the end, Stilgar decides to not betray the children. I especially like to imagine that in this first chapter, both the twins' bedrooms have glass windows with rain sliding through the outside, while Stilgar is thinking about the greenery, floods, and whether or not to kill the twins. Once Leto and Ghanima wake up, they dress themselves in special steel suits with royal capes branding the symbol of House Atreides. It is a special day indeed, since Jessica is coming to Arrakis. It happens a lot in this book that the twins talk between themselves in ancient languages, now forgotten to the Imperium. French is one of such languages. They also use the classic Atreides battle language in certain occasions. The twins have not experienced the melange trance. They know they would have more clear visions of the future by doing that, but they also know the dangers of doing such thing. As Alia, their aunt, consumes melange all the time, Something else about the melange trance that is brought up by them is the question on whether all their memories will resurface if they go through the ritual. They have many memories of many past lives, but not all of them. Leto himself only has glimpses of wars and chaos, memories that aren't completely clear to him. Something important that is brought up in the twins' conversations, and that we see a lot later in the book, is the fact that Alia is possessed. Vladimir Harkonnen has taken control of her mind, visible for those familiar with Vladimir's habits and behavior, now adopted by Alia herself. Alia doesn't know why Jessica is coming back to Arrakis. Her visions have not come back since the end of Dune Messiah, as we saw happen in that book. She insists that Leto has to go through the melange trance so that he can have visions of the future. Leto always denies her wishes and avoids having such experience. The reason why Jessica might be coming to Arrakis consternates Alia. She plays Duncan to use his mented abilities to discover why her mother is coming back. It is rumored that Gurney became Jessica's lover, but that seems unlikely. Something else that doesn't seem unlikely is the possibility that Jessica went back to serve the Bene Gesserit and it's on a secret mission for them. This is what Alia believes to be indeed the truth. Jessica finally arrives in Arrakis. As she sets foot in Arrakeen, she blesses the people, who in turn bend their knees to her. Due to the hesitancy of some people among the crowd, Jessica, along with her royal guard, is able to identify those who are infiltrated amongst the faithful. What follows is Gurney and Stilgar's men capturing these infiltrators along with killing others. They leave some alive because they need to interrogate them to know who is their leader. Jessica finally talks to her daughter, almost 2 decades since the last time she saw her. Just by sharing a few words, Jessica knows that Alia is possessed. She went down the path of the Abomination and is now a serious danger. Alia cannot be trusted. Jessica notes a few members of Alia's clergy who stand out from the rest, Javid and Zebatalef. Looking back at this part of the book, it is very interesting because Zebatalef never comes back to the story. So maybe Frank had plans for him but ultimately scrapped that out of the story, while the other character becomes far more important as the story develops. Javid is a man who has secret goals, different from those of Alia and her clergy. Not only that, but Jessica quickly comes to realize he is secretly Alia's lover. Alia's clergy is what became of the Fremen priests now that the Kizarat completely dissolved after Corbu's betrayal and death. Those who were left instead changed their loyalties to Alia and worship her instead. Jessica wants to meet her grandchildren, but she cannot do that immediately, since she was held back by Alia's clergy and has to spend some time in Arrakeen. Later in the book, before Jessica leaves Arrakeen to meet the grandchildren, she meets Gurney in a small interrogation room. Since they're at a place selected by Alia, they use the secret battle language to avoid any spies or guards from understanding what they're really saying. Gurney tells Jessica that those infiltrators among the crowd were all Alia's men. They were under a heavy dosage of drugs and, while being interrogated, died of a heart attack right after they mentioned a place called Jacurutu. Jessica remarks how she and Duke Leto knew about legends of a place called Jacurutu, but they disregarded it. As for even the Fremen themselves didn't believe in its existence anymore. Before the chapter ends, Jessica orders Gurney to get in contact with his old smuggler companions to find this place called Jacurutu, if it is indeed real. The Sardaukar back on Selusa Secundus have been training Laza Tigers under Selusa Corrino's orders. Laza Tigers are descendants of Old Earth's tigers, genetically manipulated through generations of selected breeding to create the perfect hunting animal to kill unsuspecting prey. Selusa is Irulan's older sister and the one who gave birth to the rightful heir of the Imperium, Farad'n Corrino. Farad'n himself doesn't know about his mother's plans just yet. He's much more interested in studying his favorite thing to do. The Sardaukar use innocent children imported from outside the planet as bait to train the tigers. Two children siblings are used in every session. They wear a special cape as to make them more easily identifiable for the fierce animals. A Sardaukar Levenbrech, a type of sergeant, is the one responsible for training such animals. He has a special Ixian device with controls that can manipulate the tiger's behavior and actions. The training of the tigers takes quite some time, but eventually a session in special takes place, with another set of children to be preyed upon by the Laza Tigers. This time, Vansisia and the Sardaukar Bashar, a type of commander called Tyekanik, are overseeing the occasion. After the Laza Tigers end eating the remains of their prey, Vansisia turns on the switch that frees them from the control of the Levenbrech. The animals swiftly kill the Sardaukar and eat him as well. Tyekanik, beside her, is pretty much displeased to witness this happening, for he is not the type of commander who wastes the lives of his men. Vansisia orders the Bashar to send another set of those special capes as a gift to the Atreides twins. As it turns out, Vansisia wants to kill the twins so that Farad'n will gain his rightful throne, since he'll be the only one left to claim it, once Paul's children are dead. Vansisia also orders Tyekanik to convert himself to the religion of the Fremen, the Mahdi's religion. The goal is for Tyekanik to spark the interest in the same religion by Farad'n, who will need to understand the Fremen, so that he can take control of the strong people of Arrakis. It is revealed that Javid is also giving the Corrinos information about how displeased the Fremen are with Alia's rule, that being an advantage for the Corrinos. Some time passes by and Farad'n finally takes an interest in Tyekanik's newly adopted religion. In this occasion, while they're walking through a private garden at their palace in Selusa Secundus, the Bashar tells the young prince about a preacher he brought from Arrakis, someone who can understand the meaning behind the dreams Farad'n has had in recent times. The prince finally meets the preacher. Tyekanik tells him that the secret man is blind. Because of that, he uses a special Ixian mask that works as eyes for him. We later discover, once we get to see more of the preacher, that this mask is just a bunch of cloth and doesn't do anything special. Farad'n tells the preacher about his dream: water flowing, atoms as stars, and a serpent exploding into dust. I find these descriptions a lot like what's going to happen at the end of God Emperor of Dune, the next book, especially the part about a serpent exploding into dust. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, wait until the analysis of that book comes out. After hearing Farad'n's descriptions, the preacher interprets them, but refuses to tell either Tyekanik or the prince himself about the meaning of the dream. The preacher mitigates their anger by counseling Farad'n about how to be a great leader. The prince needs to consider the will and necessities of the people, along with paying good attention to nuances such as religion and state politics. He ends up convincing Farad'n to also pursue Muad'Dib's religion, just like how Tyekanik did. While all of this happens, Selusa Secundus has gone through a process of desertification, an attempt by the Corrinos to break Arrakis' monopoly of spice, by maintaining their own population of Centrals, as to turn their planet into a second Dune. This, as we will see later, will be a complete failure. While the desert of Arrakis is shrinking and the sandworms are disappearing, Centrals are reproducing in the newly created deserts on Selusa Secundus, but they will never be able to produce melange as it occurs on Arrakis, and will eventually die out. Jessica eventually meets her grandchildren after arriving at Sietch Tabur. She gets an opportunity to talk privately to Ghanima. Their conversation ends up being mostly about Leto's plans, Jacurutu and Alia's possession. Jessica reveals about sending Gurney to find this place called Jacurutu to Ghanima. Both of them agree that Alia is possessed beyond salvation by this point. It is revealed in this chapter as well that Jessica has indeed joined the Sisterhood and is working for them again. Her objective is to separate Leto from Ghanima and train him in the Sisterhood's doctrines, so as a means to prevent him from becoming an abomination like Alia. Not only that, but also securing the real Kvisitz Haderach for the Bene Gesserit. Sometime later, Leto and Jessica also get to talk in private. The boy leaves very clear from the beginning how he has every memory of Leto I, Paul, and even Jessica herself. Leto says that he and his sister have 1,000,000 years of age inside a 9-year-old body. He says how deja vus are lapses of prescience in normal people. Leto also states that the Bene Gesserit know very well about Jessica's Harkonnen heritage. Jessica's mother was called Tanidia Nerus. Her father, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, as we knew back from the first book. Thanks to Leto, his grandmother finally comes to realize how the Bene Gesserit are intentionally manipulating her. The Sisterhood has hidden plans they haven't told Jessica yet. And it is now all very clear. Leto talks about the Golden Path, briefly mentioning what his plan is. He will live for thousands of years, but not in the way the Bene Gesserit think it is possible, by manipulating chemicals from within the human body. This immortality is something they dare not do, for the Imperium would turn against them. Leto's plan is something else completely. Jessica feels stripped of all her confidence in the presence of young Leto. He convinced her how she is a simple puppet being played around by the Sisterhood. The boy tells her that Alia intends on kidnapping her, something her daughter has been planning to do for some time now. Leto says that Jessica needs to let this happen, for in the end, it will work in their favor. A ceremony is held at Sietch Jacurutu to welcome Jessica back to her old home. During this event, she finally starts to understand the twins and what they really feel. Jessica realizes how much Stilgar is a relic of a past world, a conservatist stuck in a land of constant changes. He does not belong in the new Arrakis, just as the twins do not belong in what the Imperium has become. Ghanima inadvertently ends up making Jessica cry, telling her that Paul left many things unsaid and undone. One of those things is to tell his mother how much he loved her. Since childhood, Alia had many battles against her past memories, inside her own mind, due to her being preborn. Each past life tried to take over complete control of her body, a constant problem that remained until teenagehood, only aggravated by her consistent melange consumption. There was once a time when a man called Essos Paimon, from a minor merchant house called Nibiros, was caught by Alia's men. He was secretly a Chom spy and was put in trial before Alia to be judged for that. The Regent ended up forgiving the Chom spy and convincing him to work for her instead. But later, as Javid told Alia, Essos supposedly called her a witch, and with that, Alia obeyed what the Horde from inside her mind told her to do and ordered Essos' execution. In the next morning, Alia went through another intense episode of attacks by the Horde. Some of her ancestrals who tried to take over control of her were Agamemnon, king of the Achaeans during the Trojan War, Ovid, a Roman poet, and John Bartlett, an American writer from Massachusetts. Another figure who battled inside her conscience was Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. The Baron tries to convince Alia to work with him, accept his presence in her mind. He would not only give her advice on dealing with matters of the state, but also prevent the other ancestors from attacking her once more. Vladimir tells Alia that she should seduce and kill Javid. She knows he lied about Essos. Her priest just didn't want anyone influential near Alia. Finally, Alia asks Ziarenka Valefor, such a Russian name, the commander of her Amazons, to bring Javid in secret, at night, to her private chambers. Alia will seduce him but not kill him, just yet. Alia has accepted the Baron's offer. From here, the Harkonnen vermin will only gain more power over Alia. Duncan is introduced a bit late into the book, not as soon as most other characters. His first task, as Alia orders him, is to kidnap Jessica and make it seem as if the Corrinos did it. Idaho has spent a lot of time away from Alia, but even though he still loves her, or what's left of her anyway, he cannot look at her the same way he did in the past. There's something strange about Alia, but Idaho cannot pinpoint exactly what. While she's ordering him, the Mentat Gola uses his computing abilities as an attempt to finally understand what's wrong. Idaho realizes how Alia has, indeed, been cheating on him with Javid for a while now. Something special that he notices is how she is unable to access Jessica's memories, as if something was blocking them. He's now sure that she is possessed. Alia is an abomination. Duncan also realizes how Alia hasn't got older at all, as if she were static in time. His computing powers say that Alia has discovered the Bene Gesserit inner chemical balance to keep oneself from getting older and is using it in secrecy. Duncan thinks about how the Corrino and the other greater houses will never unite to use nuclear weapons against the Atreides. That is not only because the ruling house has more nuclear weapons than all the rest combined, but also because the whole Imperium fears that a major, non-human threat might one day invade the Imperium and threaten humanity itself. At the end of their conversation, Duncan makes it seem as if he will obey Alia's true intentions, which are for him to kill Jessica. He instead plans on taking Jessica to the Corrinos. It turns out Duncan has been in contact with the Preacher for quite a while now. This mysterious man wants him to take Jessica to train Farad'n. The Preacher looks like an old Fremen from the deep desert. Asan Tariq is the name of the Fremen boy who helps him, who is curiously blind, to walk around Arrakis, leading the Preacher toward the steps at the front of Alia's temple. Some people claim that the Preacher is in reality Muad'Dib in disguise. The Preacher stops for a moment and hears people gathered around the temple. All of them claim to be faithful Fremen who serve Muad'Dib's teachings, and yet they're all heretics filled with water. Hypocrites distorting the message of Paul. People who forgot the old ways of the desert. Society, when in times of abundance, tends to collapse into a period of decline with degenerates taking over every corner. Good old customs are replaced by immoral habits. It is said that in hard times, strong men are made. Strong men, as the Fremen were, create easy times. These easy times, now the current state of Arrakis, creates weak people. And finally, weak people create hard times. The Preacher takes over the attention of the crowd and spreads the message about their unfaithfulness. The clergy has become a group of liars, heretics. This is not the only occasion the Preacher comes to Alia's temple steps to preach to the people. As we see in the book, he will come to do that a few times. The Preacher has gathered quite a following, enough to concern Alia and her clergy. On one occasion, Alia is at the top of her tower, looking down on the Preacher spreading his false message. She plans on getting rid of him, but she is afraid how the people might react if she just sends her guards to do that in front of everyone. It is revealed during the same occasion that the Preacher, although being blind, can see very well. He has in his pocket a fake black Ixian mask, which is actually just a piece of cloth. Asan Tariq himself is a prop so that the people might actually believe that he is blind. If it is not clear yet, the Preacher is Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. In the end, he wasn't caught by a worm when he walked out into the desert, back at the very end of the previous book. Paul sends a message to Alia, Duncan, Stilgar and Irulan, for everyone to hear. He says that Stilgar should be careful not to be too harsh or too honorable, that Irulan should escape from Arrakis' palace. The Preacher reveals that Duncan is being cheated on by his wife and denounces Alia's actions, for she is the ultimate heretic. After that, the Preacher, guided by Asan Tariq, leaves the place and manages to avoid Alia's guards, who went after him in an attempt to capture the Preacher. After this event, Alia saw for the first time the possibility that she might be defeated by her enemies. And yet, she kept her belief that the plan to get rid of Jessica and discredit the Corrinos would work through. Going back to the child, Asan Tariq, his father is a man called Murris. Murris and his son are Fremen from Jacurutu, and they execute anyone who delves near their sietch. These unfortunate ones are killed and their water is stolen. On one occasion, Murris made his son kill 5 Fremen and 1 pilgrim, for he intends to turn his son into a judge of Shuloch, which is a legendary secret place inside Fremen Desert. Murtis also intends on preparing his son for the Kralizak, a legendary battle in Fremen mythology that will happen at the end of the universe. Arrakis is becoming too green too fast, and forests have appeared in many places, while qanats, which are water reserves and aqueducts, are spilling water out to the open desert, only worsening the situation. The youngest generation doesn't even remember back when water was scarce. Customs have changed too much in just a single generation. Leto looks over at a group of eroded rocks on the open desert. Those rocks are in a place called the Servant. Leto knows that Sietch Tabr will one day become a small clump of eroded rocks just like what the Servant is today. Leto and Ghanima talk a lot about the few glimpses he has of visions. Leto knows that the sand trouts, one of the initial phases in the life cycle of the sandworms, are going extinct just as Arrakis is going green. One day, spice melange will be completely gone. Alia knows about this imminent disaster. She wants it to happen. Leto tells his sister that he started having dreams. He believes that they are visions, like how Paul had dreams in the first book, before even visiting Arrakis. Leto knows that the sand trouts are not natural animals from Arrakis. They were brought here from another planet. Something brought them here. The sand trouts, when in large amounts and without any predators, can completely dry out the places they're at. Back in the first book, it was mentioned how Leto I tried to dig wells in Arrakeen. He was successful in finding water underground, but for some reason, those water sources always ended up drying unexpectedly. We now know it was because of the sand trouts. In the past, when the sand trouts were brought to Arrakis, it was a green planet with vast forests and oceans. Pardokians had realized this many decades back, before the Atreides even arrived here. The sand trouts turned the planet into a single large desert. One invasive species destroyed its entire ecosystem. Now the water is filled with predatory fish, specialized in hunting sand trouts and preventing them from drying the water reserves. The qanats are filled with these species of fish. Because of that, the sand trouts are going extinct. They're unable to consume the water and open space for the larger sandworms to survive, since water is poisonous to them. Leto believes that the preacher, this new religious figure from the depths of the desert, might be their father, Paul, and he also thinks that if he visits a place called Jacurutu, he will find the answers he's looking for. We know later that it is true, the preacher is Paul. This place, Jacurutu, is supposedly an abandoned sietch, a taboo for the Fremen, who never, with a sane mind, tried to find such a cursed place, for it was a sietch of water thieves. Stilgar, when young, along with other Fremen nabes, united and killed off all of those who lived in Sietch Jacurutu and left it empty, forgotten in the middle of the sand dunes of Arrakis. Nowadays, neither Stilgar nor any of the other nabes remember where this cursed place is located at. Leto and Ghanima have the habit of going out of Sietch Tabr alone when it is nightfall. They spend time around the rocks near the sietch. The twins need answers from their ancestors to follow with their plan. Once, they tried taking part in a ritual which consists of them impersonating their parents. Ghanima impersonates Chani while Leto impersonates Paul. They find it to be of little help, other than some insights on stuff Leto has already figured out by himself. Nothing else important was discovered, so he breaks off from Paul's control with ease. But Ghanima, on the other side, is still trapped under Chani's control. It takes hours for the twins to bring Ghanima back. It is said that women are far more vulnerable when it comes to possession by past ancestors like this. This is what happened with Alia, becoming possessed with Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. So apparently every case of possession in history is the result of someone with prescient tendencies falling under control of an ancestor, according to Dune. After the ritual is over, the twins promise to never try something like this again, but as a result of what they went through, they decide to follow with the golden path. It is not a perfect timeline, not a perfect future, but it is the only one the twins see a way to follow through. Ghanima wonders if the future she saw of the Golden Path is the same one Leto did. A future where divine Leto Atreides II surpasses his father's legacy in every way imaginable. She is hesitant, but decides to follow with Leto's final decision. Once, Leto and Stilgar went out to that place called The Servant. After 2 whole pages describing just how the desert looks, way more than the final battle at the end of the first book, might I add, Leto starts talking to Stilgar. Leto needs to prepare Stilgar for the dangers about to come. He needs to prepare for unforeseen consequences. The boy tells the Nabe that there are 3 possible futures he can see. The first, with Jessica dead so that Leto can secure the spice monopoly. The second, with him married to Ghanima, as a way to maintain concentrated power over the Imperium. And the third, with the undeification of Muad'Dib, to reduce him to a simple man, while Leto becomes a new god, to replace his father. In Fremen culture, incest is abominable, just like possession, which is currently what happened to Alia, something Stilgar is unaware. Leto points out to Stilgar how he is thousands of years older than him. Stilgar shouldn't treat him like a kid, as he does. He is not a simple person, but a community. Multiple people from different ages all inside the same body. Leto knows the true nature of time. He knows that 1,000 years and a single year is all the same. Only the human perspective makes them seem like a long period of time. Leto states how he remembers back when the Fremen lived in Turgrod, and orders Stilgar to take Ghanima away from Alia and to remain himself far from her. For Alia is the true enemy. All of that is to be only in case Leto dies. Their conversation ends with Leto remarking how young Fremen woman became more beautiful recently. After their conversation is over, we see Stilgar's perspective after talking to Leto at the Servant. He ponders about the planetology station, built on the shield wall, near Arrakis' palace. A full set of labs and houses were built for the planetologists who were responsible for terraforming Arrakis. Fremen now use mud bricks to build houses in open places, leaving the sieges behind. They don't wear steel suits anymore, don't care for losing or wasting water like how they did a generation prior. Stilgar remembers how, after Shaddam IV, the 81st Padishah Emperor of the Greater House Corrino was deposed by Paul, his Muad'Dib said that the Imperium would last a long time under the Fremen, under Arrakis. The old Fremen realizes how his old customs have been left behind and how Alia has been lying to him for a long time now, telling Stilgar that Arrakis isn't changing as fast as he thinks. Just like in real life, in our modern times, old customs are abandoned by degenerate and ignorant generations that have never experienced hardship in their lives. Weak people that end up creating hard times. Duncan is back at the Arrakis palace, talking with Irulan when Alia comes in, infuriated. The Sietch Nabes voted to place Jessica as Queen Regent in place of Alia, since she is the mother of their Mahdi. Duncan understands why Alia brought him here to talk about this. She wants him to use his mentat abilities to identify who are the traitors within Alia's court. Starting with Irulan herself, the Imperium used to live under a strict feudalism, but once the Jihad turned it homogeneous, the old system broke completely. Alia gives out information her intelligence captured. There's a new influx of products within the Chom. Mentats, sick doctors, fraudulent financial experts. These are being hired in high amounts recently. Idaho processes information and comes to the understanding that many minor houses are growing richer and quietly becoming great houses. He deduced that the Landsraad would come through drastic changes in the near future, but that it is very unlikely for the Navigators Guild or for the Bene Gesserit to take full control of the Imperium, since both sides prefer to stay behind the houses of the Landsraad and help them do their bidding instead. Once the topic of the conversation changed to the possible assassination of Alia and the twins, Duncan had what he perceived to be some sort of prescient vision. He saw that Alia wasn't and would never be the target of an assassination attempt, and instead, the twins would most definitely be. Duncan saw the possible danger in the gift the Corrinos just gave the twins, 2 royal capes that were already dispatched to them. He saw that in the future, the Holtzman effect would be broken, and such things like the shields and the guild's method of space transportation would become obsolete. Duncan asks Alia to prevent any animal to be imported to Arrakis, as he saw that the tool to be used in the twins' assassination would be something from off-world. His request, though, fell on deaf ears, as Alia was already far too gone in her possession to even consider any attempt that isn't directed at herself. A sort of public trial with Alia as a judge commonly happens in Arrakeen. In this occasion though, Jessica is to take part, and both mother and daughter will sentence the people who come to their presence. Before the event begins, Javid comes to talk to Jessica. He wants her to denounce the preacher who has been cursing Alia's sanctity and her clergy. Jessica realizes that he is only doing this and talking to her because Alia ordered him to do so. Jessica openly rejects his request and orders him out, humiliating him. After this interaction, the Reverend Mother was sure that Javid was, indeed, Alia's infidel partner. What follows is how Jessica realizes how ridiculous Alia's court has become. She thought about the words spoken by the preacher and agreed with them. Whoever that preacher was, Paul or not, he was correct about Alia and her court. You can really see the parallels happening here. It is as if Paul were Jesus, and Alia's clergy and court the Sadducees and Pharisees, a single man fighting against a corrupt and heretical system that no longer cares for the truth their God once shared with them. Alia finally comes inside the courtroom. The entrance doors are opened for the people of Arrakeen to come in. Jessica sees that it is clear how Alia intends on destroying her today, but Jessica is sure that Alia's plan will fail. The first person to come to the court is a 2-meter tall troubadour who dares to claim that he is a better Belisat player than Gurney Halleck himself. His name is Tajir Mohandis. He was brought here because guards arrested him for singing a song calling Alia a young Koam, a legless ghost of a woman. Tajir claims that he intended to be brought to the presence of the Atreides to test if they really are the good, open-minded house some people claim them to be. Jessica wants to include him in her inner circle, for he is the type of man Duke Leto would have taken as one of his soldiers, like Duncan and Gurney. But she comes to the conclusion that it would be better to send Tajir away to serve under Farad'n, as to keep him safe and far away from Alia. Jessica uses the voice quite a few times during this chapter, and just now I think to myself, have I explained the voice? I think I have, but in case I hadn't, the voice is a power the Bene Gesserit have to tone their voice in such a way to control anyone under their influence. The next one to come to Alia and Jessica's presence is a past Fedaykin of Paul Muad'Dib. His name is Gadhian Al-Fali. He came to talk to Jessica about a matter of the desert. A priest from Alia's cult comes running into the courtroom, and after a hand signal by Alia, he shoots at Jessica with a Maula pistol. Jessica tips over her throne and jumps around, avoiding his shots, but not without getting a hole in her clothes. Gadhian strangulates the priest and almost kills him, thinking that he was the target, but Jessica, who is now beside him, makes it very clear that she was his real target. It is obvious that Alia was the one behind this failed assassination attempt, but she behaves as if nothing had just happened. Al-Fali tells everyone how the ecological transformation of Arrakis is destroying the planet. No sandworm will be left alive in the desert if this continues the way that it is currently going. If the sandworms die, it would be the end of Arrakis. But Alia dismisses all of this and lies that everything is under control. Jessica tells everyone, now that it is obvious to her as well, that Alia is possessed by none other than Baron Vladimir Harkonnen himself. She exposes the abomination her daughter has become. It is Alia alone that is destroying Arrakis and the Atreides, but she cannot see any of it, because it is Vladimir who is controlling her, destroying the Atreides' reputation and extinguishing spice production, all while lying to Alia that he is only helping her. Jessica looks around the room and identifies who are against her and some Fedaykin who remain loyal. Along with them and Al-Fali, they manage to escape the chaos that the courtroom has become and leave Arrakeen immediately. Some time has passed and Jessica is at Al-Fali's Sietch, a place called the Red Abyss. The Reverend Mother notes how this Sietch used to have pony-sized dogs, but they seem to have died out completely, probably poisoned by Alia's clergy. Al-Fali was never a supporter of Alia after all. Duncan arrives as Stilgar's messenger and convinces Jessica to come with him. In this chapter, two things are left quite clear. The first is Duncan's secret love for Jessica, for he always felt like that for her. And since Alia is like a younger Jessica, in his mind, it would have been the same if he married her instead. The second thing is that Duncan is following the preacher's orders, but he is still unsure on whether the preacher is or isn't Paul. Jessica leaves with Duncan, but he later reveals that he is going to give her over to the Corrinos so that Jessica can train Farad'n just like how she trained Paul. Young Leto had previously told Jessica about this kidnapping, so she realizes that this is part of his plan. Jessica has to train Farad'n. The twins finally decide it is time for them to escape out into the desert. They dress the special clothing Farad'n gave them as a gift. They know this is part of the Corrinos' assassination plan, but it is part of their vision, so they have to go through with such attempt. Leto sees a butterfly flying out on the open desert. How can such a delicate being live in such a harsh place like Arrakis? The twins walk by some quanets before getting to the rocks of the Servant. They are careful not to fall into the water, for the predatory fish in it are not only dangerous to the sand trouts, but also for any other animal that dares to get too close to the water they're in. Night falls as Leto and Ghanima slip into tight spaces between the rocks of the Servant. By now they had seen the Laza Tigers, the predators sent to kill Paul's children. They know that these animals are being controlled by someone hidden nearby. It doesn't take long for the tigers to arrive at the Servant, and from between the cracks of the rocks, Leto manages to kill one of the animals by using poison on his crysknife. Ghanima ends up with a leg and an arm injured by the animals, but she also manages to kill the other tiger with her poisonous crysknife. Since Ghanima is far too wounded, she has to remain behind. Leto takes his sandworm and starts his journey to Jacurutu. His sister uses ancient abilities, given by her past ancestors, and changes completely her memories of what just happened. Ghanima now fully believes that Leto died fighting the Laza Tigers, and that his remnants were eaten by a sandworm. This is in case a truthsayer interrogates her. That way, their plan will still remain a secret. Truthsayers have been present in Dune since the first book. They are Bene Gesserit specialized in interrogating people across the Imperium to identify if they're being fully honest about their accounts. Ghanima starts making her way back to Sietch Tabr, while recalling old memories from when the Fremen were pushed out from every planet they tried to settle in. Each time they were banished, more hate and brutality accumulated amongst them. This is what led the Fremen to become the masterful warrior culture during the time of Muad'Dib. Arrakis' harsh climate also contributed to their rising strength. Ghanima finally arrives in Sietch Tabr. She curiously finds one of the many entrances to the Sietch. This one is brightly illuminated, something very uncommon, while a Fremen couple is enjoying time together right in front of it. The man is a mathematics teacher called Palin Basha. He once tried explaining Muad'Dib with numbers, while the girl, much younger, is a Fremen called Muris. Interestingly, it is the same name as Asan Tariq's father, and just now I noticed it. By observing them, she notices that the man has some sort of Ixian device. Ghanima realizes it is a remote control device, definitely the one used with the Laza Tigers in their attempted assassination of the twins. Since she is wounded, Ghanima has to think of a way to get rid of Palin Basha without having to fight hand to hand with him. She recalls old memories of a priestess from Assyria. Her name was Joph, and she used a poisonous nail, blown by a tube, to assassinate someone in the past. Ghanima does the same thing. She cuts off a tube from her Frem kit and manages to kill Palen Basha with ease. Her revenge of the Corrinos is half finished. Now, she wants to assassinate Farad'n himself, for Ghanima believes he was responsible for killing her brother. Leto traverses through the desert with his sandworm. His visions now are getting stronger. He can already see alternative timelines where the Fremen continue to live freely outside the Imperium. He thinks about the Iduali, the name given to the Fremen who stole water from other Fremen, those who came from Jacurutu. The other Fremen tribes believe that the Iduali have completely died out, but they are wrong. Muris and Asan are two examples of Iduali still left alive. Leto thinks about how the Golden Path is the only future humanity prevails. He knows that if he follows this future, everyone in the Imperium will grow to hate him. They will look back to the times of Muad'Dib and think about how good they were. The sandworm is released to the desert. Leto then sleeps on the side of a sand dune. He has already reached Jacurutu, his destination. It is revealed that Jacurutu is nowadays known as Fondak, a sietch now serving as an outpost for smugglers who harvest spice from Arrakis. Leto is observing Fondak and mapping the place from the nearby sand dune he had slept on the previous night. He notes how the place is completely empty, lacking any living animal. There's not even any signal of birds. Those animals are always present in rock formations throughout Arrakis. But here there's not even a single one. Fondak even lacks desert plants, only having a few bushes here and there. The only thing Leto could see is a single wind trap. Leto observes the wind trap with a pair of binoculars. He finally comes to the conclusion that the reason no animal nor bird can be seen here is because the wind trap has poisoned water, killing any unfortunate living being that comes to drink it. Once the night falls, Leto starts hearing sounds of bats, along with the strong winds of a forming Coriolis storm. To entertain himself, Leto thinks of his past lives and reveals something quite interesting in this passage. Earth as a whole, as a planet, has been completely forgotten to humanity's memory. The planet it once was doesn't even exist anymore. Humanity now has no idea that Earth has ever existed, nor that Canterbury existed, as Leto recalls a memory from one of his ancestors who went on a running marathon there. Might I add that the Canterbury scene is a great musical genre as well. At night, someone lights a fire on top of the highest rocks of Fondak. Leto is concerned by it, for he had not seen anyone yet. He tries to enter a dark passage among the rocks, but is caught by an inkvine trap while still thinking about the fire that was just lit. Inkvine is a plant natural to Giedi Prime. It has certain properties which make it good for traps, such as the one Leto just fell in, but also can be used as a whip, which is how Gurney got the scar on his face, being whipped by Brute Raban while he was still a slave of the Harkonnen. The Atreides hired his services after that point in his life. The same happened to Duncan, who was also a Harkonnen slave once in the past. The man who set the trap remained under the cover of darkness and quickly incapacitates Leto, striking him unconscious. Vensicia tells Farad'n all about her secret plans. News of Leto II's assassination have already spread across the Imperium. Farad'n, who was kept out of all of her plans, obviously dislikes what she claims to have done in his name. Vensicia thinks to herself how much her son resembles her late husband, Dalak. He was a quiet, introverted and introspective man who preferred to study rather than to deal with state business, just like how Farad'n does. Farad'n takes note on how Tyekanik had to fight his own principles just to obey Vencicia's orders and follow with her plan to use the Laza Tigers. The Bashar stopped calling her as my princess. Now he just refers to her as my lady. Farad'n questions a bunch of different things on a wide array of topics and ends up making Vencicia mad. He thinks to himself about how easy it is to manipulate his own mother. Farad'n later leaves the room after saying that he intends on studying the complete history of House Corrino. Duncan sends a request to the Corrinos to let both him and Jessica take refuge in Selusa Secundus. Farad'n calls in Tyekanik and Vencicia to come to his study room to discuss this matter. The young man and the Bashar come to the conclusion that Javid is not only working secretly for the Corrinos, but also that he's a double agent for somebody else. When Cisia says that letting Jessica come in might be a secret plan by the Atreides to seduce Farad'n, either by words or sex, so that they may have complete control over the heir of the Corrinos. Farad'n is intrigued by the idea of becoming emperor after he started studying about Paul Atreides and Shaddam IV. He ends the conversation after alluding how the conquered always follows the influence and the customs of the conquerors. After the jihad, the Imperium adopted steel suits as the latest fashion, a dressing code, even though their steel suits are useless in comparison to those real ones used back in the times of Muad'Dib. Farad'n knows that in order to be a good leader, a beloved emperor, he has to understand the necessities of the people and care for them. Just like how Paul did, and differently from how Shaddam IV and Alia failed to do. In this chapter, it is mentioned that all governments always end up as an aristocracy. After all, it is a selected group that holds power over everyone else. Finally, Farad'n and Tyekanik meet Jessica and Duncan at their reception room. Farad'n's spy sent him information confirming that Ghanima survived the assassination attempt, but unfortunately, Leto definitely didn't. A civil war has also started in Arrakis. Desert Fremen took up arms against Imperial Fremen and Alia. Sietch Tabr became neutral ground, for Stilgar decided not to side with either Alia nor the other Nabes. Sabit Rekush, a representative of the Landsred and the Bene Gesserit, sent a letter to the Corrinos complaining about the murder of Leto Atreides II. The Sisterhood still wanted his genes, what is now impossible for them to get. Because of this, Farad'n gets over control of House Corrino and denounces his mother to the Landsred and the Bene Gesserit, revealing that she was the one who ordered the assassination of Leto, not him. It is also revealed that the Bene Gesserit wanted Farad'n to get rid of Jessica, since she now has no more use for the Bene Gesserit with Leto dead. The Sisterhood promised Farad'n that he would receive Ghanima as his wife. This way, they could secure their Kvisets Haderach while he would become emperor. Jessica convinces Farad'n to let her stay freely in Selusa Secundus, and she will train him just like how she trained Paul, against the wishes of the Bene Gesserit. The new head of the House Corrino accepts her proposal. Duncan tries to kill himself in the same chapter, but he's prevented from doing so by Tyekanik and the other Corrino servants. They ask him why he tried to do that, and Idaho answers that he is tired. For Alia has used him well enough and now she doesn't need him for anything else. Just like how the Bene Gesserit have no more use for Jessica. But Duncan might still be useful to the Corrinos. The preacher comes to Alia's temple to lament Leto's death. He spreads a message about how Paul and Leto died and people distorted their message and religion for their own benefit. To this, a priest from Alia's cult tries to question him from the middle of the crowd. He is silenced after the preacher reveals how he is a charlatan who uses the religion of Muad'Dib only when it is convenient for him and do not care about the true message of Muad'Dib. While all this happens, Alia is secretly in the crowd, disguised as a Fremen from the deep desert. She intends on getting closer to the preacher, as a way for her to be sure whether the preacher is or isn't Paul. Once Alia is close enough, the preacher holds her by her arm. He reveals very quietly to Alia that he is indeed Paul. He warns his sister that she should stay out of his way and not try to silence him. He then leaves to go back to the desert with his guide. The book gives a lot of signals that Paul has gained his prescience back, at least to a certain amount. He correctly ascertained that the man who questioned him was a priest of Alia's cult, and he correctly picked Alia off the crowd. As mentioned before, he doesn't even need a Santarik to guide him around, for he is only a prop so that the people think that he is really blind. After Paul left Alia alone in the crowd, she thinks to herself how she's alone and how everyone except Ghanima is now against her. After this takes place, Alia goes back to her palace and is mad at the failure by the guards that were responsible for capturing the preacher. Kaza is how the leader of these troops is called. He's a descendant of the Cadlam family, a tall and blonde family that once ruled Sietch Jacurutu. Alia ends up making a joke with his name, calling him a Cad Lamp, if you read in the English edition. But in Portuguese, the scene was translated to Alia calling him Cadela, which translates to bitch. Alia finishes the discussion by telling them to capture the preacher and not kill him. She tells them that the preacher could be Paul, which is a lie, since she knows very well that he is indeed Paul. Later, when Ghanima has been brought to Arrakis, Alia's court tries to convince her to accept Farad'n's marriage proposal. Ghanima is completely against accepting it, for she believes Farad'n is still responsible for Leto's death, even if he banished his mother for planning and executing the whole deal. Irulan and Alia come in to convince her after the court has completely failed in doing so. Irulan wants it to be a real marriage because that would solve their problems between the Corrinos and the Atreides and their rivalry, while Alia wants it to be a fake marriage so that Ghanima can kill Farad'n at the first opportunity she gets. Ghanima accepts Alia's plan to do exactly that, which saddens Irulan. She knows that doing this will completely destroy the reputation of the Atreides and ruin their legitimacy and honor. Murdering Farad'n would turn the other great houses against the Atreides. This is precisely what Alia wants. At the very end of the chapter, Ghanima thinks to herself how much worse Alia's situation is. She is so possessed she cannot even realize the outcome of her actions. It is unclear whether Ghanima will really play along with Alia's plan. The end of this chapter makes it seem she won't, but later on she behaves as if she will. But maybe that is just so Alia believes that her plan will work. Some time passes and Ghanima is outside in a garden tower of Arrakis' palace, looking at the horizon while night falls. Talking about night, I don't think I have mentioned that Arrakis has 2 moons, but yes, that's also a detail we come to learn. She realizes how her voices are getting stronger, are demanding more space inside her mind. Irulan comes to her to try to talk her out of Alia's plan. Ghanima complains about Irulan not wearing a steel suit, while Irulan complains that they might be in danger of ranged weapons in this open place. Ghanima says that House Atreides has a bloody past. They can trace back their lineage directly to Agamemnon, the Greek legend. She then threatens killing Irulan as well as Farad'n, but she decides that it is not worth doing so. Ghanima wants to kill Farad'n, but is scared of going down the same path as Alia did and end up like her. It turns out Farad'n is addicted to spice and has to wear contact lenses to hide his blue eyes. This is a common thing among the more powerful houses of the Imperium. Members of the Great Houses, Bene Gesserit and guild officials all use these contact lenses to hide their addiction from others. Farad'n tried to consume spice melange to have visions just like Paul did, but he was unsuccessful. He thinks back on his final decision towards his mother, banishing Wensicia for her crimes against House Atreides, but he wonders if it could have been a mistake. This chapter mentions the Treaty of Arrakis, which dictates that the Corrinos should remain in Selusa Secundus and that they should have a limited Sardaukar army size. This is very similar to the Treaty of Versailles, a great way to brew hatred in younger generations. Farad'n notes how, since their defeat in Arrakis, his Sardaukar have gone through even harder training. That has guaranteed that they are as strong as the Fremen. They are now a 1-to-1 comparison of strength. Even with that, Farad'n doesn't have any intention of directly attacking the Atreides, only if they become much weaker and his allies in both the Landsraad and Chum side with him. The head of House Corrino thinks all of that while watching Duncan through a secret room filled with cameras. Idaho is waiting in Jessica's guest room for his turn to talk to her. When he is finally let in, he immediately confronts Jessica about their part in this ordeal. The Imperium under Alia has betrayed everything Paul and Duke Leto once stood for. Duncan wants to leave the Atreides service and wants Farad'n to marry either Alia or Ghanima, but only under his own terms. Jessica's place is filled with cameras and listening devices. Everything that happens in there, Farad'n is aware of. The preacher ordered Duncan to join the Al-Oroba tribe, the ones who curse and despise the Atreides with all their strength. Like back in the first book, under Leto's orders, Duncan spent a lot of time among the Fremen to learn about them. Back then though, it was with Stilgar he had spent his time. Jessica has a secret plan in Selusa Secundus, but Duncan, with this confrontation, could potentially destroy that plan. Because of that, she prepares to kill him with a single blow. Duncan sees right through her intentions and tells Jessica that she will not kill him and that he won't leave until she releases him from serving the Atreides. Which is what Jessica does. To end their discussion, Duncan says how the Bene Gesserit witches have worked under shadows for so long that nobody can trust them, nor have their lives even slightly compared to those of the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers. Duncan leaves the room, closing off by saying that he doesn't believe Jessica has ever served the Atreides and that Farad'n should send her back to Valak 9 at the first convenient time. In his mind, Duncan thinks about how he has masterfully proceeded with his real plan. It is also in this chapter that the Sisirads are mentioned for the first time. Jessica says that they are a higher council of the Landsraad, held by the Great Houses. This is not only the first time they are mentioned, but also the last time. Farad'n training has started. Jessica needs to teach him the Prana Bindu and the Bene Gesserit doctrine. The former is the Bene Gesserit control over their bodies, every single muscle, nerve and internal chemistry possible to be manipulated. While teaching it, Jessica thinks to herself how much Farad'n reminds her of her own late son. Only 8 days have passed and Farad'n finally completed the first step in his Prana Bindu training. He was so excited, he came to Jessica's room at 3 AM in the morning to tell her of his success. Jessica now tells Farad'n how one's mind controls every aspect of his own life and reality. Now it is time for Farad'n to start training his muscles. It was during this visit in the middle of the night that Farad'n started to see what Jessica really intended to do by training him in the way of the Bene Gesserit. He willingly accepts to go through with her intentions. Eventually, Farad'n's graduation comes. Jessica congratulates him, for he is not a Corrino anymore. He is now a Bene Gesserit. Tyachanik and the Corrino counselors realized what was Jessica's plan far too late. Now there is no coming back. Leto wakes up to a heavy smell of spice melange. He's inside a rock cell, deep in Sietch Jacurutu. Nemri, Javed's father, is there waiting for him to wake up. The old Iduali considers himself the Mizarba, the iron hammer that will judge if Leto should be left alive and teach him or kill him right there. He starts by questioning Leto about very specific cultural and ancient aspects of the Fremen and Zensuni cultures. Leto says that he searches for the Lisano el-Haq, the light of the moon, and that he follows the path of the Al-Mutakalin, the perfect man, the exemplary Fremen. The conversation ends after Leto says how Alia's code is trying to hide the path of salvation, which can only be revealed by Shai Hulud. Nemri decides to let Leto live, for now. Later, Gurney comes into the stone room. He reveals himself to be the man who captured Leto and brought him here. Gurney says Jessica is behind him and Nemri being there and making sure that Leto is ready to take over the reign of the Imperium. For that to happen, Leto needs to go through with the worm journey, as his father did in the past. He takes out a syringe with accumulated spice and injects Leto with it. Leto starts having visions of an adult version of himself living in a cabin. A woman makes him coffee. In his vision, he has some sort of armor. His skin is not his own. Visions of every single one of his past lives in their entirety come to clarity. Someone in special also appears to Leto. His name is Harun. He is supposedly the oldest common ancestor of all of humanity. All of these new visions flood into Leto's consciousness. Paul's memory protects his son from being overwhelmed by all of the other memories. Not only every past is clear, but also every future. Leto can see all of them. He can see that Namri is a treacherous man, someone Gurney cannot trust, because he has hidden intentions unknown to Gurney. Visions of the entire Sietch of Jacurutu appear to him. Leto can see every room and everything happening within them. He remarks on the abundant presence of pests in the sietch, something uncommon, for Fremen normally purge these things from their sieges. For the following days, maybe weeks, Leto is given food and drink filled with spice melange to further sink him into the warm journey. Leto reflects on the Missionaria Protectora, the division of the Bene Gesserit which works with the Panoplia Propheticus, the creation of the religious myths to control the people from throughout the Imperium and make them serve the Bene Gesserit. This has helped the Atreides previously, for when Jessica and Paul first escaped into the desert. Their religion back then foresaw the arrival of the Lisan Al-Gaib, the one who would save the Fremen and bring them paradise. Namri and Gurney come once more to talk to Leto, who tells them that the truth will never be fully revealed and that knowledge of everything will never be reached by humanity. He says that Arrakis was made to train the faithful, which seems to convince Namri that he is ready, but Gurney is still skeptical. Leto tells Gurney that he accepts to help Jessica and the Bene Gesserit, but Leto warns him that there will be dire consequences after doing so. After they leave again, Leto ignores his inner voices and talks only to his memory of Paul. He tells his father that he will bring social order, but not in the way the Imperium nor the Bene Gesserit expect him to do so, for he will make them fear him. On another occasion, Leto is taken outside after consuming another huge amount of spice melange. He is sitting on the hot sand while Namri's niece, Sabiha, is sitting on a carpet in front of him. By taking a good look at her, Leto is sure that she is the woman he saw making coffee in his visions of the cabin. With all these visions Leto has been having, sometimes he cannot tell if they are visions of the past or the future. Inside his mind, the memories of Duke Leto and Baron Vladimir are fighting over complete control of him. Harem's memory has been of great use, for Leto II started using him to defend himself from the other memories. But he fears that he might become an abomination like Alia and lose control. He understands how that fear is the main reason Alia went down that path. Leto thinks back to Yin Yang and reflects on how he can see every single muscle, nerve, and cell within his body. They're all saturated with spice melange. He has visions of futures with Arrakis completely covered with green fields. No single sand dune was left on the planet, and no Shai Hulud is left alive in the universe. This future saw the extinction of the sandworms and the complete collapse of the Imperium. After coming back to his senses, Leto talks to Sabiha. She reveals to him how his life depends on Namri's final verdict, not Gurney's. Leto refers to the sandworms as serpents. This might be an indicative that they evolved from snakes, not worms, as some real-life biologists have theorized on YouTube. He refers to the sandworms by their old name as well, dragons of the desert, as Old Fremen called them. As they talk, Leto reveals to Sabiha how he has visions with her, futures in which they fall in love and live in a cabin. This future is the same one the sandworms go extinct. After sitting on the desert for half a day and a whole night, Leto finally asks Sabiha to take him back to Sietch Jacurutu. He has a final vision of Ix. He remarks on how the Ixians forgot everything about the language of those who discovered the planet, for its name only meant the number 9, since it was the 9th planet of their star system. The Ixians also call Muad'Dib's religion as the Xian San Shao. This makes me think, together with that previous mention of Yin Yang, that the Ixians are descendants of either Chinese or Japanese peoples. Some time passes and Leto is awakened by Sabiha's water rings, hanging from her hair, hitting against each other. They talk once more. Leto finds curious how Sabiha, who is 18 years of age, has already passed the time of marriage for a female Fremen. He realizes that Namri is saving her for someone special. He tells Sabiha how the Bene Gesserit planned on marrying Leto and Ghanima. The result of their incest would guarantee, along with Leto's submission to them, that their lineage and the genes of the Kvisets Haderach would remain secure. Sabiha has been for a while the one who's feeding Leto with food saturated with spice melange. On this occasion, he finally thinks about the tribal tattoos she has on her face. He calls her closer and tells her about his visions of them in love. He secretly uses the voice and puts Sabiha to sleep. Then he dresses in his own still suit, later leaving Jacurutu quietly. Nemri and Gurney come in sometime later and find Sabiha sleeping alone. Leto has been gone for quite a while now, and there is a Coriolis storm forming out there, so they just can't look after him until it has subsided. Sabiha tells them how she sabotaged the water pumps of Leto's still suit, so he wouldn't survive for too long. Leto managed to get back to the same location Gurney had captured him. He's eating supplies from the Fremen kit he stole, while planning to ride south, through the wastelands of the Tenzeruft, knowing very well that's what Gurney expects him to do. In none of his visions, Leto saw himself escaping Jacurutu. He needs to get away from there and sever his connection with Sabiha. He has to cut the threads that lead him to other timelines divergent from that of the Golden Path. Sabiha is nothing but a future he has to avoid. Some of the other visions he sees are terrifying, and those also need to be avoided. Leto catches a sandworm and rides directly towards the Coriolis storm. Once the worm gets far too tired, he takes advantage of its burrowing and sets a quick still tent under the sand, protected from the Coriolis storm above ground. If he survives this, then Leto will guarantee that the Golden Path is the only future ahead of him. It will take some time for the storm to pass, so Leto falls into a tau sleep, breathing a single time every hour, waiting for it to be over. Leto wakes up and leaves his buried still tent. It is nighttime. Leto looks up to the two moons and the stars all around the sky. He reminds to himself how time and space are all projections of the mind, similar to what Jessica said about one's mind creating its own reality. After catching another sandworm, he rides down south once more. Once that sandworm is tired, Leto releases it to the desert and finds a smuggler spice harvester. It turns out one of the smugglers overseeing the operation is Maurice, Asantaric's father. Leto convinces him that he is indeed Leto, recently escaped from Jacurutu. Maurice was well aware of Nemri's operations there. The boy convinces him to be taken to Shulach, the secret smuggler base south with outcast and banished Fremen as its main inhabitants. Leto tells the Yduali how he knows Paul is the preacher and how he is living beside Maurice at Shulach. He also knows that Maurice's son is Paul's guide. The Yduali accepts Leto's request and pilots his ornithopter back to Shulach with him. Leto thinks to himself about how close he is to completing the main step in his golden path. But in case he fails, Allahu Akbar! Shulach is a chain of ravines and areas circled by quanets filled with predatory fish. These encircled areas are used to grow and trap sand trouts and young sandworms so that the banished can trade them with smugglers to be sold off-planet. Not only the banished live in Shulach, but also many slaves. A new one just arrived from Jacurutu. Her name is Sabiha. She was sent here for her failure of preventing Leto from escaping. Leto talks to Maurice once more and tells him that he will lead the Fremen through the Krelizak. And after giving water to the dead, that is, crying in Fremen culture, Maurice starts to really respect him. Some time passes. Leto is in his tent meditating and having visions while being saturated by spice melange. He has consumed so much spice melange, any normal human would have died out of an overdose by now. But with his Bene Gesserit powers and knowledge, he can control his inner chemistry down to the cells themselves. Sabiha brings another bowl of spice-saturated food and insists on Leto eating it. He instead talks about how rich the Fremen of Shulach are. They have so many pits with sand shrouds and juvenile sandworms, qanats, slaves, and the best equipment available in the Imperium. The most advanced spice harvesters and the best ornithopters, only inferior to those of the Empress Regent herself. Leto, still ignoring Sabiha's food, leaves his tent and uses the voice to keep her there for a while. He takes a walk out during the night. He knows that not even in 1,000 years a sandworm will be able to grow and produce spice melange outside of Arrakis. But the smugglers of Shulach still try to sell to desperate houses in humid planets these sandworms and sandtrouts. Leto steps on a pit filled with sandtrouts. After putting his hand on the sand, he attracts them to himself, remarking on how some Fremen eat sandtrouts, for they have a sweet taste and carry a lot of water. Something he starts doing once his armor is fully assembled. By controlling the chemistry of his own body, along with its saturated state, Leto manages to link to the sandtrouts in a molecular level. They attach to his skin and they become a symbiote. Venom himself! Only his face up to his forehead and ears is left outside of the armor. The rest of his body completely covered. This new skin serves as a super steel suit and an impenetrable shield to defend himself. He starts jumping and running around. Leto has become a superhuman with incredible speed, agility, reflexes, and strength. He can run kilometers in seconds without getting tired. He can jump meters without much effort. Leto comes to another pit that has a young sandworm. This one comes out of the sand and shows its gaping mouth to Leto, but it doesn't attack him. The sandworm is at the same time attracted to Leto but also scared of him, just standing there in front of him. By now, not only Sabiha but all the other Fremen, smugglers and slaves from Shulach have waken up and are watching Leto control the sandworm and show off his incredible powers. Leto runs away into the desert, but is followed by some ornithopters from Shulach. He eventually hides under the sand and the Banished miss him completely. He plans on destroying all the qanats and ecological stations around Arrakis as to delay the terraformation of the planet by a few generations. This would most certainly enrage Alia, making her believe it to be the fault of rebel Fremen, and would also give Leto an opportunity to set a new chronogram to terraform the planet. Leto is no longer human. This is just the start of the Golden Path. His every action will completely overshadow the legend of his father and change the Imperium forever. Back in Jacurutu, Gurney Halleck is discussing with Namri about the current location and situation of Leto. Sabiha has been sending secret distrams to Namri about him, but the old Idwali denies to share anything with Gurney. Halleck feels left in the dark, for Jessica has been only sending nonsense orders to him while Namri is lying to him and not sharing everything he knows. Gurney points out how they should only kill Leto if he shows signs of possession, to which Namri disagrees, showing how he has a different agenda. The Idwali calls Gurney an inferior foreigner and says that money should be enough to keep him working. Gurney finally confronts him directly and the men get into fighting stance. Namri finally reveals to Gurney that these orders from Jessica to drug Leto with spice and let him have visions were, in reality, orders from Alia. That's why they seem nonsensical to Gurney. Namri is a loyal servant to Alia, as he says before trying to kill Gurney, which fails and he dies with ease. Gurney is triumphant. So it makes me wonder here if Alia also knew all along about the Laza Tigers and purposefully let them come to Arrakis. Not only that, but if she also knew that Ghanima had erased her own memories of their fight against the Tigers. Maybe Alia knew all along that when Sissia was training the Tigers on Selusa Secundus and used the Corrino plan to her own advantage. Alia is the sole villain of this book. That's incredible. Gurney easily kills Namri, for the old Idwali was far too confident in his own skills and ignorant of Gurney's abilities. Halleck hides the body of Namri before leaving disguised as a Fremen himself. He will search for Leto on the desert alone from here on out. Some time passes and Gurney is waiting outside the entrance to Sietch Jacurutu, once ruled by Nabe Esmer Tuik, for the smugglers there to accept his refuge. In reality, Gurney only needs time to steal an ornithopter. He notes to himself how most foreigners and smugglers are amazed by how he can catch and ride sandworms by himself. Gurney learned to do so just by observing the Fremen. Now Gurney glances over the horizon. Destroyed Quanas are all around. A dying willow tree calls his attention. Its water reserve had been leaked to the desert and sealed the fate of the tree. Just like how Gurney Halleck himself, the willow tree is an alien in Arrakis, something that doesn't belong there. Melides, a fat smuggler with a faulty steel suit, accepts Gurney's refuge and lets him in. Halleck thinks to himself how Esmer Tuik would have killed Melides on sight, were he alive right now. Duncan arrived back in Arrakis, transported by the guild, and has to immediately report in full detail everything that happened in Selusa Secundus. Idaho can see that Alia is long gone, so he hides in his mentat abilities and answers Alia's questions in such manner, as her mentat. She thinks to herself that Duncan is not trustworthy anymore. Alia sends him to wait for Zia, who will take him to Sietch Tabur, lying that she's sending Idaho to oversee the tribal negotiations with Javid, the clergy and Stilgar, who are trying to convince the rebel Fremen tribes to end the civil war. Duncan sees that Alia is completely blind to how she is losing all power. Even her Amazons have decreased drastically in numbers. He doesn't wait for Zia and drives an ornithopter himself, for he also knows that Zia is to kill him without ever making it to Sietch Tabur. While going to Sietch Tabur, he cries, thinking of how Alia has died a long time ago. Her body is now under the control of a monster. In Sietch Tabur, Idaho tries to convince Stilgar to break his neutrality and turn against Alia. Gurney had sent a message to Duncan, warning about Leto and about how Alia knows about his escape down south. Stilgar, though, doesn't believe Duncan at all. He doesn't think that Leto is alive, nor Gurney to be the one who sent this message to Duncan, nor for Alia to be possessed. Duncan, with all available information in his mentat powers, knows that Alia is at the center. She was the one who commanded the Idwali from Jacurutu, the Banish from Chulach. She was the one managing all the illegal flow of money through the smugglers from Arrakis, the one responsible for letting the guild land the Laza Tigers in Arrakis. Stilgar mentions how some believe Duncan is only mad because Alia supposedly cheated on him. He says how Alia will go through the test of possession someday, and prohibits Idaho from sending a message to the supposed Gurney. Their conversation ends and Javid comes into the room. Idaho immediately kills him with his crysknife. Stilgar is startled by this act of dishonor in his neutral zone. Idaho throws the 3 biggest insults a Fremen could receive and leaves the room. Stilgar goes after him and kills Duncan in the corridor outside, in front of most of Sietch Tabur. Only after killing Idaho, Stilgar realizes that this is exactly what he wanted him to do. Alia has no choice but to have her vengeance on Stilgar, for not only he failed to protect Javid, Alia's representative in Sietch Tabur, but also killed her husband. Stilgar now can only trust his old friend, now dead, and do as he asked, turning Sietch Tabur against Alia. He calls upon his Fremen to catch worms. Anyone who wishes to follow him into the desert may do so. Stilgar tells his wife Hara to take Ghanima and Irulan. They will escape together. Then ends by ordering his Fremen to send Idaho's message to Gurney. Leto is standing out in the middle of the Tanzaruft. He got there by riding a sandworm with his bare hands. He sees in the distance another sandworm, carrying a blind man and a kid. They are the preacher and Tariq, who, after noticing Leto in the open desert, directs the sandworm towards him with the goal of killing him. It doesn't go as he expects. The sandworm stops meters away from Leto and doesn't eat him. Tariq calls Leto a jinn, a spirit of the desert, but the preacher is skeptic about what it is they've just found. Leto officially reveals himself to his father. He orders Paul off the sandworm and Tariq to take it away to the desert and release it free. Night falls while Leto has finally his talk with his father. They reveal that both had visions of the Golden Path, but their own versions of it were different, divergent in many ways. Leto tells his father about his transformation. Paul touches his armor. Even feeling it himself, Paul still thinks that going down the Golden Path is a mistake. Tariq tries to kill them both by using a shield to attract an enraged sandworm, but Leto is swift in killing him and throwing both his body and the shield far away toward the open desert. Paul reveals himself completely defeated to Leto, for he fears the Golden Path and admits that he really wished to die that day he walked away. Unfortunately, there they were, the Duali, waiting for him in the desert. They kidnapped him, took him away to Shulach and Jacurutu. Paul shares that he had the same visions as Leto, having this skin that is not his own. Paul's vision by itself showed a horrible future, but Leto's is far worse, as they come to realize. Leto tells his father how the Muad'Dib's jihad would be completely forgotten, a footnote in the history of the Imperium. Paul asks if there is any other way, any other future where humanity survives. Leto confidently says that either the Golden Path, the Krezilek, or humanity will go extinct. Gurney Halleck is at Shulach. He thinks about how melange production is going down, while its price is rising up. It is said that someone bought half of the planet Nova Brans, which previously belonged to House Metuli, with just 21 kilos of spice melange. After thinking about the spice, Gurney recalls a memory of something that didn't happen long ago, back when he was brought to Shulach. Leto had found him back at a rebel siege located in a region called Ger Ruden. He remarked on how Leto was wearing a weird steel suit and how he brought the preacher along with him. Leto told Gurney that he escaped Jacurutu because Namri was ordered to kill him regardless of Gurney's final verdict. Gurney is still unsure whether Leto is an abomination or not, so the preacher finally talks to him, telling him that Leto has passed his test. He's not an abomination, but a community working in harmony from within the body of a young boy. Gurney starts suspecting that the preacher is Paul, but eventually Paul reveals himself to Gurney. The preacher was indeed Paul. Paul asks Gurney to forget the memory of Paul Atreides. Now only the preacher is left. Halleck thinks how much Paul looks twice as old as Gurney himself is. The desert transformed Paul into the preacher. Nearby Fremen hear their conversation and form a large crowd around them, trying to touch Paul. Leto throws them away with his inhuman strength and takes Gurney and Paul away to somewhere safe. That has happened a while ago. Now, Gurney is at Shulach, watching the slaves working relentlessly to stock up melange. Paul won't talk to him, and Leto went away somewhere and hasn't been back yet. Times have become strange. Alia receives the most recent reports from her Amazon guards about the current situation in Arrakis. Namri was killed by Gurney Halleck, who has disappeared completely. Maurice says nonsense about a kid, supposedly the same Leto reported by Namri, jumping out of Shulach and running kilometers out through the desert in instants. More than 40 Quanets have been destroyed all around Arrakis by the Fremen rebels, and the occurrence of Coriolis storm has drastically increased everywhere in the planet. The only good thing that has remained is Alia's plan to kill Farad'n with Ghanima. She is currently at Sietch Tabr, neutral ground. Vladimir asks Alia to call in her new assistant, Buer Agarvis, to her royal bedroom at night. Alia manages to resist Vladimir this one time, a rare occurrence. Not long after, news about Idaho's and Javed's deaths arrived to Alia through Buer Agarvis, who was together with Javid back in Sietch Tabr. Alia at first doesn't feel anything for either of them. She asks Agaravis to repeat what happened countless times. She then orders him to hunt down Stilgar and kill him. And, by doing that, he will become Nabe of Sietch Tabr itself. Before dispatching Agaravis to go on such mission, Alia orders her new Amazon assistant, Shalus, to give Agaravis a good shower, since he's stinking. After Shalus and Agaravis are done, Alia goes to her bedroom and finally breaks. She cries over the death of the only person who ever loved her for real, Duncan Idaho. It's been 11 months since the Demon of the Desert has started his attacks. During that time, Arrakis has descended back into the old customs. Some say that the Demon of the Desert is the one responsible for destroying the Quanats, drying up the many new cities built in the open desert, farms and green areas in the process. People have abandoned such cities and run back to the Sietches. Those are now filled with people. Other people claim to have seen many dead sandworms across Arrakis. Their spice was rotten when they were found. Halleck is said to be everywhere. Everyone is seeing him in distant locations all at once. Finally, the preacher disappeared completely. Maybe his mission is over, to disseminate chaos in Dune. Times have become strange in Arrakis. Ghanima is still with Stilgar and his group of Fremen. She thinks to herself how the only reason she has left to still live is to get her vengeance on Farad'n for killing her brother. After that is accomplished, she can be reunited with Leto. Hera comes and tells Ghanima that Buer Agaravis has accepted to meet Stilgar in secret at the abandoned city they're at. When such event takes place, Ghanima witnesses the discussion between Agaravis and Stilgar. That one bursts out. He admits that he despises Alia and doesn't want to fight against his own kind. He assures Stilgar that Alia will pardon him if he gives her Ghanima to follow with the marriage plan. Ghanima is immediately drugged and a bag is put over her head. She's taken. The bargain has been accepted. Leto ponders his decision. He is not human anymore. His next millenniums will be one of suffering, and the body he will evolve over time. Paul comes to talk to him, with a new kid as his lead. Leto dismisses the kid and informs Paul that Farad'n has come to Arrakis. The marriage is about to begin. Leto asks Paul to be the preacher one last time, in front of Alia's temple once more. He warns his father that this time he won't be coming back to the desert. Paul understands the consequences. He accepts Leto's request. In this journey to Arrakeen, Leto will be the kid to lead the preacher. Alia is at her tower, looking down on Arrakeen. It ends up, Agaravis and Stilgar fell right under her real plan. Now, Agaravis is dead and her Amazons manage to capture Irulan and Stilgar, who are trapped at the dungeons of Arrakeen's palace. Alia is certain that Ghanima will kill Farad'n and that everything will be over soon. Alia watches a small group of sensual female dancers from Ix putting up a show in front of her temple. The crowds, though, quickly change their focus from the dancers to the preacher. He is back with his kid and is standing on the middle of the stairs to Alia's temple. Zia notifies Alia about Farad'n and Jessica's arrival. They're waiting outside her room with a small escort of Sardaukar. Alia lets them in and orders Zia to prepare Ghanima. Dress her in her wedding gown and bring more Amazon guards to the audience room they're at. The preacher puts up a speech which enrages the people. The city dwellers turn against the Fremen and the pilgrims from abroad. They're all ready to kill themselves. The preacher escalates by saying that the faithful have one last blasphemy to get rid of. That blasphemy's name is Alia. Chaos starts among the crowds, and Alia's priests, infiltrated among the people, manage to stab Paul to death. Alia orders Zia to bring Ghanima. She still has one plan to finish, but then, the doors to the audience room blast open as if by an explosion. Leto and Ghanima are standing on the other side. Leto took down hundreds of Amazons on his way there. Ghanima remembers all of her suppressed memories about the Golden Path and forgives Farad'n. Alia orders what is left of her Amazons to arrest Leto and Ghanima, but the boy easily takes them out. Alia tries to fight him herself, but she also is no match against the god powers Leto has acquired. Alia is finally defeated. Her voice starts shifting between multiple different ancestors and personalities. They talk in forgotten tongues and try to take over control of her body. Leto breaks a window and tells Alia that she has only one way to save herself. Vladimir Harkonnen takes over control of Alia's voice. He begs her not to jump out of the window, but she manages to crawl her way to the window and falls down the tower of the temple to her death, finally ending the possession. Jessica is terrified by everything that has just happened. Farad'n comforts her. Some time has passed since Leto became Emperor. Tyekanik, Farad'n, Ghanima, and Jessica are waiting outside Leto's audience room at Arrakin's palace. The Emperor, after taking over, quickly acted towards the guild, Landsred and Shoam to maintain them under his power. Ghanima has already got closer to Farad'n and even somewhat intimate with him. She tells him many things. Ghanny says that Leto will reign for almost 4,000 years. He will take over completely the Bene Gesserit breeding program and that the sandworms will go extinct in 200 years. The sandworms will, apparently, come back once Leto returns to the sand. It is said that many rebellions started around the Imperium. Leto responded quickly to them, and his answer will become even more effective once the Fremen and Sardaukar are unified. Biarek, a planet under the rule of House Tamud, is mentioned to be under siege, probably by Leto's own forces, although it is not specified in the book. Stilgar comes in and waits with the other characters. He wants to return to the desert and go back to the Fremen life. He talks to Jessica, who forgives him for killing Duncan, and their brief interaction is over. The final chapter starts with Leto sitting on the Lion Throne in Arrakeen. Farad'n has become his personal scribe, writing down everything Leto says and does. He recalls seeing Leto proving his strength and invulnerability to the Landsred and Guild, gaining their total submission. Now at the throne room, many houses from all around the Imperium come to pledge their loyalty to Leto Atreides II and bring him gifts. Tyekanik and Stilgar themselves have been doing well as leaders of their unified Imperial army. It turns out, Leto managed to convince both Stilgar to lead the Fremen and Farad'n to give him control over the Sardaukar. Leto thinks how Alia will be remembered in history the same way Yui is. She was not only a traitor that tried to destroy House Atreides, but also an abomination. After the gifts have finished coming, Leto calls Farad'n and Ghanima to get close to him so that they can talk in private. Farad'n is now to be known as Hark al-Ada. This name is the one behind most of the quotes that appear at the beginning of the chapters in Children of Dune. They are writings about the history and first years of the reign of Leto Atreides II. Leto admits to Hark al-Ada that he is possessed, but not by Vladimir Harkonnen like Alia. Instead, he's being controlled by a community of good ancestors led by Harun. This man called Harun was either the first Egyptian pharaoh or the first Persian or Babylonian emperor, but I will say it is much more probable for him to be the pharaoh one, since Leto comes to say that his Imperium has a pharaonic model. Leto tells Hark al-Ada about the prolonged peace which will be followed by the Kralizak, once his rule comes to an end. Thousands of years of peace, as Ghanima had also told him recently. Leto will marry Ghanima, but her children will come from Hark al-Ada. Leto admits that his virility is something non-existent anymore, for those organs have long been dissolved under the central skin. Leto then leaves the throne room and is followed by his entire court. Ghanima and Hark al-Ada are left behind. She tells the future father of her children that Leto had to be the one to go on with the transformation. He was always the strongest one of the twins, after all. Something we saw in this book and we see some other times throughout the Dune series is how the sandworm, Shai-Hulud, is sometimes called as a serpent or a dragon of the desert. This happens specifically on that chapter Leto talks to Sabiha in the desert. That is quite interesting because in Old English, worm is how dragons were once called, and worm sounds a lot like worm. So there's sandworms. And that's very curious if you ask me. As I mentioned earlier as well, there's undeniable parallels between the preacher and Jesus Christ. Paul had to fight a corrupt system controlled by Alia's clergy that had long abandoned the old customs and distorted the true message of Muad'Dib to fit their own personal agendas, just like Jesus had to confront the Sadducees and Pharisees, who had distorted the true message of God. In the end, Paul died defending the truth, just like how Jesus also died defending the truth. Paul, though, didn't resuscitate, at least not in the same way Jesus did. Paul will always be with his son, sharing his memories with Leto II, and his sacrifice ultimately resulted in the salvation of humanity. To end this part with the inspirations behind Children of Dune, there's some very interesting similarities between Leto and Ghanima with a real historical figure, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Previously in the series, I mentioned how the title Shah, Emperor of Persia, inspired Shaddan IV. But it seems that the inspirations did not end there. Reza Pahlavi had a twin sister. Thanks to her, he was able to find his own path and personality, just like how Ghanima helped Leto find his own path in this story. Just like how the Atreides themselves are described to be skillful pilots, the Shah was also reported to be a good pilot himself, although not exceptional. Another thing similar between Mohammad Reza and Leto is how both of them ended up overshadowing the rule of their fathers. Reza completely reformed and modernized Iran, while Leto managed to end the conflicts of the Imperium and establish a peace that lasted up to 3,500 years, as we will see in the next book in the series. So, after revising the script for the video, let's say that I also got very interested in Attack on Titan recently, and there are some big similarities between it and some of what happens in Dune. For example, how the Titan warriors have the memories of the previous users, just like how Paul, Leto II, and the Bene Gesserit have the past memories of their ancestors. And in the case of the Bene Gesserit, of the previous Reverend Mothers. Another similarity is how Eren's Attack Titan has the power to see the future, like the Prescients in Dune. For last, we have a whole deal of the main character becoming a monster, like how Leto became God Emperor, Eren became the Colossal Founding Titan. I just wanted to point out the similarities I noticed, so now you can see them as well. Maybe Hajime Yasayama was inspired by Dune when he wrote certain aspects of his manga, or maybe even he doesn't even know that Dune exists. Everything is possible. I will also say this. I plan on someday making a full analysis on Attack on Titan, and if possible in a single video, but let's see if I'll be able to do that. Well, that was my take on everything that happens in Children of Dune. So far, I think that this is the best Dune book from the entire series. The only other book that might take that position is the next one. So if you're interested in watching my analysis of God Emperor of Dune, subscribe and leave a like. Until the next video.